Welcome to another season of the Three Thought Podcast, and we are glad that we are finally back after a long winter break with exams and adventures beyond the exams. But mainly exams.
Yeah.
Sadly, but we are back and we are ready for another season, and we have made some major changes, and the most vital changes, at least in my opinion, is that we are going to miss Casper for the remainder of this, mostly the remainder of this season.
Well,
because
you're going to miss him.
Not really. It was just a kind of courtesy, but he's kind of an asshole. But he's in San Diego he's in an exchange year in San Diego University. So, at least I heard from him. He's joined a what do you call
a fraternity.
Yeah, fraternity. So we hope
we
he doesn't get in trouble.
He would go there.
Yeah, pretty surprising when he is conservative, but I hope he doesn't get in too much trouble. Something that might get him in trouble in future political careers.
But in all honesty, we are going to miss Casper, and he's probably listening to the podcast, I would imagine. And when he's coming back later in this semester, we're going to have him on and listen to his adventures. So,
yes. So hopefully he will expand our fan base in San Diego. So let's talk about the new format we have for this season, because last season it was a success. It was better than we expected, but we did listen to some of the feedback or the criticism we have received throughout the season, and we have taken some of those criticism into consideration.
Yeah.
And the most notable is obviously, since Casper is not here, we're gonna have some new people in our podcast. Not a substitute for Casper, but we get some random people here from the American Studies program, maybe from the professors.
I wouldn't call them random people, but
well, they're random for me. But no, serious. But we're gonna get some people who we think are bright when it comes to the American Studies program, who know what they're talking about, and hopefully they can make our segments in the podcast more entertaining. Maybe we can have some discussions, and we of course we noticed that some of the episodes where the professors have been involved, those were the really successful episodes. So we're gonna involve them as much more in this season.
Yeah, I think we all agree that the best episodes we made were when the professors were in to talk about something, because then it got extremely interesting. They are expert in their field, so we are going to try to get as many experts in this season as possible. And the other episodes where we don't have professors, we're going to invite people in from American Studies to talk about a subject, which we are actually having today. One of my close personal friends called Mikkel.
Hello. After a lot of begging from the guys, I finally deigned to appear on the program. No, I'm of course kidding. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, we're glad to have you. So can you please tell a little bit about yourself, what you're interested in when it comes to American Studies program?
I'm of course very interested in politics. It's something I really like to follow. And I'm also into some history and some culture. So I believe I have something to add there.
Sure.
And before we go on to this today's topic, we also have shrinking the amount of time at the podcast to be around an hour instead. So when we have some longer discussion, if we have some professors in and it's going all the time, we're going to make it a part 2. So you don't have to sit in your car for an hour extra when you're driving home from work.
Yeah, you don't have to wait in the parking lot before the episode's done, then go to work.
Yeah, exactly. And also we would like to give a shout out first to all our fans and listeners.
You know who you are.
I don't want to call them fans, but listeners. And also a big shout out to our friend Christina Jürgensen, because she is going to be what we can call our PR woman. She's going to look at our grammar and post and see that's in order. So a huge shout out to her as well.
Yeah, she's basically the grammar Nazi of our
Exactly.
PR department. So, well, it is. But a huge thanks to her because she has been very helpful in the last couple of months where we needed some people to look at our announcements on our fan side. So yeah, let's go on to the topic. So Baba, can you tell us a little bit of the topic today?
Well, today we decided to talk about something extremely contemporary in America at the moment. And that's of course has to do with Donald Trump and his government shutdown a couple of weeks ago. And if people don't know, the government shutdown was because he wanted to have his border wall funded through Congress. But since Congress have flipped, or the House in Congress have flipped to Democrats, he cannot get the funding through the House to get the border wall he wanted. So he had basically made a national emergency. And that's what we're going to talk about today, what that means and how that's going to affect the future and the person in America at the moment. What he wanted out of Congress was $5.4 billion for the border wall, and Congress refused to do so.
Yeah, of course. The interesting thing is that he couldn't get the funding either before the House flipped.
That's true.
So it's been a long process for him where he's been battling both with the Democrats, who he's of course habitually blamed, but also that he's been facing backlash in his own party.
But actually, didn't the Democrats agree to fund $5 billion before, and he refused to do so? So now he has to make an even.
It was not five. It was something like maybe a third of what he'd asked for, and then he got real pissy about it, and then he actually raised the amount by like $500 million that he wanted. So it's been very much a back and forth. There's not been much help there from anyone.
Just to understand, Trump, this is one of the primary causes for his presidency. That he promised this wall, and that's why he's making a big deal out of it, because it's just a promise that he made for all of his voters. So it's kind of he has to do this in his opinion, and we all know how petty he can be.
It is his biggest promise, and everybody knows about the border wall. I mean, it's one of the biggest running jokes about Trump, built the wall, and people are always making fun of it. So he's basically just trying to succeed in his campaign promise, but having a lot of difficulty.
Yeah, of course, because it's going to be a huge campaign issue going forward. He's already eyeing the next election, the 2020 election, and he knows that if he doesn't have some significant results to show, that's going to be hard for his base to swallow.
Yeah, and also you have to think about the personality of Trump. He likes to prove his doubters wrong. One of my theories is that he didn't take the presidency, the election seriously in the beginning, but when he gained momentum, it was like, okay, I can actually do this. So I think the wall was also one of those things where he just blabbering, and then it just became a reality. Okay, now you have to fulfill this promise.
Yeah, he's talked very openly about that several times, where he's said in interviews that a lot of what he said originally on the campaign trail was just him freestyling, and then when he found something the crowd reacted to, he just started repeating it. He just started going at it again and again and again, and people loved it because
it's just a goofier version of Hitler.
That's an interesting analogy, but
that's actually one of the theories in World War II, right? Because one of the things that made him popular during the National Socialistic Party in Germany was that he would go to these random events around the city and would just make some random speeches, and then he got fueled by these remarks he made about Jews. Like, he could get people on his side, but obviously it's two different things. But you gain momentum on freestyling.
I mean, I've never heard of that. That might be very true. But I do think that you can make some argument that Trump and his rhetoric has some flavor of fascism. Definitely. I mean, because he does do the whole thing where he really blames a certain group for the ills of the country. And he has made some promises about making a huge investment in the country. He's talked about this huge infrastructure bill, which is something the Nazis did. But of course, then he kind of forgot about that when he became president, or at least he let that come at the back burner of the wall. So.
Yeah, but obviously we know he's not close to Hitler at all.
No, but it's a fun analogy, but it's also very.
But you know, they have similarities in the way that rhetoric works. So
yeah, I will say they do have some similarities in the, as Mikkel pointed out, some fascist similarities, but he's not like Hitler. He's not out to exterminate all the Jews and
or Mexicans.
And I don't like to give any credit to a guy like Hitler, but I will even say that Donald Trump is a lot more incompetent than Hitler was.
Yeah.
And that's not to say anything. He's a far worse guy. Everybody knows that. But I definitely believe that he was a smarter person than Donald Trump is. And that's probably the worst problem that Donald Trump has, that he is an incompetent fool who does not know how government works.
Yeah,
this example with the government shutdown is a great example of how he has no idea of check and balances.
I think the big thing to remember is that he's driven by the feedback from his base.
Yeah.
He's driven by his base, by what they want. They don't really. I mean, he doesn't care what's good policy. He cares what gets his base fired up, because never stopped going to campaign rallies. He likes the attention, and you know that's also what's been driving him. That's what one of the really big theories about what caused the shutdown is that, you know, everyone was yelling at him to say, no, you have to stand firm on this. You have to demand this from Congress, and if they don't give it to you, then you veto. Then you let the government shut down. Then you force the Democrats to change their mind, and that's, you know, he's really been getting that from Fox News, you know, which is. He spends a lot of hours watching if his schedule is anything to go by, and that's been driving him. So it is scary that he is not driven by policy or ideology, but by this craving for attention.
Yeah, just to get it out there for those who don't know, the Fox News is it's a channel that is pretty pro-Republican. So
very much.
Very much. It's not a secret. So.
Yeah, and the government shutdown, for people who don't know, it basically means that all federal government, not all, but most federal agencies are not funded. So people either had to stop working, or they're going to go into work for free. And it's a huge problem for the American society and American economy. And this is the longest government shutdown in history. It was 35 days, and Donald Trump, he even criticized Obama tremendously throughout Obama's term when there was a government shutdown over Obamacare. So he's basically a hypocrite and have now made the longest government shutdown, and he's even thinking about doing it again to get his wall funded.
Yeah, and it's not a new thing that the Republicans have forced the government to shut down. I mean, it's really started happening in the 90s. When they did it during Clinton's presidency, because it's something that's really been, you know, it's very much been driven by the Republican media. They really go out there and say, no, we have to stand firm. We have to force the Democrats to change their mind, and we're going to do this by shutting down the government. The problem is that each time they've done it, it's it's not gone the way they thought. Every time, you know, it's been the consequences have hit regular people.
Yeah. Suddenly,
you know, the food aren't checked for diseases, so, you know, that hits imports, and you know, all the national parks get filthy, and all these kinds of services that people are used to getting suddenly stop being there.
Yeah.
And plus, on top of that, we have all the government employees who lose their wages, and who are suddenly, you know, in danger of losing their houses and everything. And we hear these stories in the media, and suddenly, instead of being, you know, this party that stands firm on, you know, their opinion and are really forcing change, they become the bad guys. So it's
bad politics.
It is bad politics, but it's really something that's been been forced by Republican pundits who go out and say, no, we have to do this. This is the way we get things done.
I mean, it's basically with all the politics. It's like either you're with us or it's an ultimatum.
But that's the interesting thing, as Mikkel was mentioning about Republican pundits who are talking about we have to do this. There is a section in American politics, especially on the Republican or conservative side, that believe that everything wrong with society is the government's fault. Yeah. So the government shutdown, in some people's eyes, are not a negative but a positive, because everything wrong with the society is the government's fault. So some people actually believe that the government shutdown was a good thing, even though that it's affected hundreds and thousands of government employees.
Yeah, of course, but the thing to remember is that those who believe such a thing are the very far right,
Yeah, but
which is the fringe, yeah. Which unfortunately they have a big sway on the media. They have and by having a big sway on the media, they have a big sway on the politicians because they know that the media is how they get to people. So unfortunately, that means that they believe that they have to listen to these pundits. They have to listen to these fringe people, even though in the end it'll cause all those that are moderate to swing against them.
Yeah,
which is what we've seen time and time again.
Yeah, just to remember, because in terms of other countries compared to the U.S., their loyalty to your party is much stronger than most other countries, and that's why you see we're talking about Fox News channel like them. They have such an influence because the voters are going to listen to them no matter what.
Yeah, and it's especially been happening in the last 20 years when, things have just gotten worse and worse, and the gap between the parties have just widened, and people who were moderates before have become more and more radicalized. Radicalized is perhaps not the best word to use, but they've definitely become more extreme in their beliefs.
Well, maybe polarized, because it's always comparing yourself to the other party, and you can't compare yourself to the other party. That's where it has gone to today.
And unfortunately, we've seen that very, very clearly in polls and all these things they've used to examine this. That because of the prevalence of Fox News and its very much and how it's very much biased and it's not afraid to be that, we've seen that Republicans have become polarized and swung to the right far faster than Democrats have gone towards the left.
Yeah.
Which means that they sometimes come across as being unreasonable to us because we are a lot further to the left than most Republicans.
Yeah, sure.
But it's actually it's just been happening because this new media landscape is happening.
And you have to remember those channels who are actually more swayed to the left, they are actually following the same trends now. But we usually look at Fox News as the most biased, in my opinion, if we're talking about the right.
Yeah, but it's also worth talking about because it's the biggest and the biggest news channel on regular TV, and it's the only real Republican one, because there's CNN and there's NBC and CNBC and all these different ones that are all sort of to the left to a bigger and lesser degrees.
Yeah.
But it's not one central platform that presents these things.
And then that's one of the things I absolutely detest with American politics is it's the way. For example, if you compare it to Denmark, right? We have it's in our constitution that the media can be owned by the political parties for a reason. That there's a
but you can't really say that Fox News is owned by
the
Republican Party.
But you have these political affiliations. There's a reason for why you can't have it compared to other countries. And one of the fun facts I have about the Fox News is when you look at, for example, games like Grand Theft Auto, right? It's anyone who's played Grand Theft Auto is just a satire of American society. And the Fox News in Grand Theft Auto is Weasel News, where their slogan is, "We confirm your prejudice," which is kind of funny when you talk about that.
But we've also had politically affiliated news when we had it in newspapers when they were the primary source of information in Denmark. Every party had their own party affiliated newspaper, but that's changed over time. And I mean, we really have we're really trying to put forward that both all the Danish news channels really have to try and present an objective view of the news, and of course that has been a positive thing. I think we can all agree. But that was also the case in America at one point. When they started being able to broadcast, it was one of the requirements given by the government that they should be objective and that they should accurately represent the news and the facts.
Yeah.
But of course, that's changed. I mean, there's been changes. I don't know what exactly caused this and when exactly they started going the other way.
Well, I know a little bit about because I had a subject about it in last semester with two semesters ago with Jan Bonda, one of the professors we're going to have in at some point, and it was especially around the 90s with Bill Clinton, where the Fox News started coming up. And the problem, an interesting thing about the Republican Party compared to Fox News, it's not the Republican Party who is making the agenda for what Fox News is going to talk about. It's Fox News talking about what the Republican Party should be. So in some sense, Fox News is actually more powerful than the Republican Party is, because they're the news channel who's setting the agenda, if you will, of what Republicans should align to. And because of this shift in the left to right spectrum in American politics, especially around the 90s and late 80s, Bill Clinton, he ran as a New Democrat.
Yeah.
And that was why the left of the Democratic Party, they also sort of shifted towards the right, or you can say the middle, but the left kind of disappeared, the far left disappeared, because even the left party of the Democratic Party started becoming right-wing in some sense, and then you had the Republican Party who was extremely right-wing.
Yeah.
So that's why there's now, you can say there's a counter movement with a guy like Bernie Sanders. He's trying to drag it towards the left again with Medicare for all. So now there's a new counter movement, I will say, in America, and it's going to be interesting in the next election. Here, by the way, just announced a president bet. So I have a bet with Casper that he's going to win the presidency. So that's going to be exciting to see how that goes out. He still believes he has no chance. I believe he actually has a better chance now, especially when looking at the midterms, because I was really surprised over how many states the Democrats actually got some seats in, especially because it was a lot of southern seats. Yeah,
so.
I agree, but that could be for another topic.
Yeah.
But it was especially under Bill Clinton when there was this idea that all Democrats should be this New Democrat because that's how you win elections.
Yeah.
And that was true in the 90s because the spectrum has shifted so far to the right, and it was not long after Reagan, the greatest president of America, if you ask Casper.
Yeah, if you ask the Republicans, god damn it. But also when you look at some of the policies Bill Clinton he made in the 90s, it's actually kind of shocking the effect of those policies have made, especially when you look at, especially when it comes to the criminal laws in the U.S. They were certainly changed, and those were done by the Democrats.
Exactly.
I mean, Hillary Clinton, actually, when she campaigned, some of the things she campaigned against was her own policies from the 90s. Her own legislation that she had helped put in. So it's a drastic change. Absolutely.
That's why I hate Hillary Clinton. Like she is the definition of the politician who just waits where the wind goes.
That's why people hated Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Because people didn't trust her.
Yeah.
She was for Medicare for all before she started going into politics, and then in the 2016 election, she was against it because it's not practical, and we got Obamacare and whatever. Yeah. She was against gay marriage until
2013, I think.
No, I actually believe it was 2014 or something. It was way past public opinion.
Sure, and also when we talk about Hillary Clinton, we can nothing but mention Bill Clinton, who's actually said publicly admitted that those criminal laws he helped pass on in the 90s, those were the biggest mistakes that he ever made, and he knows the effects of those policies.
It has a huge impact on minority communities, and it was a disaster for African Americans, especially in the criminal system.
But the interesting thing is that when you compare actual opinions, the actual opinion of the average Americans, with what's represented in the media and what most politicians stands for, it's actually a lot more progressive than you think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who believe that we shouldn't have these tough laws, that people should be better rehabilitated instead of sentenced to long sentences. We have a lot of people who believe that we could really do something about Medicare for all, that we can expand Medicaid, all these things. And I think that people that politicians have just kind of lost their grasp about what their constituents really want.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain change of mentality, because in the 90s, the mentality was certainly, when it came to the prison laws, that it was really focused on retribution rather than redemption, where there's a lot of focus now on, people should have a second chance when they have been in jail.
I mean, one of the big things about Obamacare that, a lot of the Republicans really resisted was the clause about pre-existing conditions, that they had to accept people even if they had pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
And, when they tried to repeal it once Trump came into power, they found out that even their own constituents wanted to keep it.
Can you explain what pre-existing condition is for people who don't know?
Pre-existing conditions is, any, medical condition, any disease or, chronic diseases, terminal diseases, or just, something that's wrong with you that means that you require treatment. Because the big insurance companies would reject you because they wanted you to pay but not need them. Because that's how they made their money.
So if you have had cancer once, you cannot get insured because you have cancer once, and if you get cancer again, that's a pre-existing condition.
Yeah. Exactly. And so there's a lot of people who, when the Republicans came back, and they had held a town hall, to meet their constituents, they found that a lot of their constituents was incredibly angry at them for trying to remove them. There was a lot of videos that came out about, teary-eyed people who were, screaming at them, if you do this, you kill my wife, you kill my son, you kill my husband.
Yeah. Because of the health insurance in America, you cannot afford to pay it out of pocket. And if you have a pre-existing condition and the health insurance refuse to pay for your treatment, you have to pay it for yourself, and that can be hundreds and thousands of dollars. So it is basically a death sentence.
Yeah, and the Republicans are facing a lot of these dilemmas now because of the changing attitudes towards these different policies. And we also have one of these dilemmas when comparing it to, the border wall. If you could explain that, Mikkel.
The border wall?
Yeah, the border wall, the whole dilemma about that we talked about.
The idea that, there's all this illegal immigration is one that's been spread a lot in conservative media. That it's really something that they've talked about, and how it's a big problem. It brings gang violence, it brings drugs, but what we actually see is that it's been really declining heavily. If you take a look at a graph over the last 8 years and how many illegal immigrants have come into the United States, it's been a drastic change. It's much fewer today. And actually, it's only been this past year that they've seen a tiny increase for the first time in over a decade in the amount of illegal immigration.
Yeah.
And it's actually fallen by more than 100%. I mean, if you had, I believe it was like 800,000 a year 10 years ago, and last year it was something like 50,000. It's an incredible change. And of course, this is not what they're interested in telling you. So instead, they talk about how they come up, they walk all this way, and they of course talk about the caravan that they've talked about again and again, these huge groups of people who are coming up. The thing is that the caravans, they bleed people along the way. So if they start 5,000 people, perhaps 500 arrive at the border. And, on top of that, we know that those are the minority. The vast majority of immigrants who come in the legal and other entries. They come in by plane, they come in by boat, they come in, just driving in their car. They don't walk across the border like they believe. But this is the image that's been painted to them. Yeah. So they really believe that the most effective way to curb illegal immigration is to build a wall, to build this fencing, to build these steel slats, all these different ideas that they've talked about to, physically prevent people from coming in.
And as Mikkel was mentioning, they're coming in legally to planes or car and whatever. And the most illegal immigrants in America is people who have overstayed their visas. So they came in legally, but they're not allowed to stay there because their visas have expired. And that's how most illegal immigrants come into America and are illegal immigrants. And there's even statistics that shows that illegal immigrants commit, I believe, half as much crime as native-born Americans, not Native American, but people born in America. So they even commit less crimes than Americans born in America.
But that's not the picture that's painted to people. And I mean, there is a lot of talk about how there's, MS-13 and other gangs. And, now we just had the big trial of, what's his face, the drug kingpin, El Chapo.
Yeah, El Chapo.
So people have this idea that this is how it happens. That's where the crime comes from.
I mean, the imagery is like the one South Park painted, where if you ever seen the episode, The Last of the Mohicans, where Butters accidentally crosses the border, and now he has to go back into the border, and they really painted the way that most Republicans are trying to image it, where they basically just a bunch of Mexicans who's trying to cross a wall.
Yes, which is of course not at all what's going on, and it's become a big problem because while they really believe that this is the way to solve things, it's of course not the real way to curb these things.
Yeah, and as you explained here before, we recorded the whole thing about the dilemmas when it comes to the legality of actually building the wall. It's much more complicated now because it interferes with the checks and balances.
Yeah, actually, that's the thing that he really tried to get this money through Congress, and when it failed, that's when he chose to declare national emergency, and that's going to be challenged, which he acknowledged himself, because what he's doing, we're not sure if it's legal.
But a national emergency is something the president can claim or use executive powers to make a national emergency if something immediately is going down in America that needs help now but does not have time to go to Congress. It could be, for example, a famous example could be 9/11. That was a national emergency and people needed help right away. And Trump now is claiming that this is a national emergency despite as Mikkel just mentioned, the facts about illegal immigrants is not on his side, and it sets a bad precedence.
Yeah, and a national emergency doesn't have to be about national security as such. For example, Obama declared a national emergency when there was a small outbreak of Ebola, but because they were really, really worried that it was going to spread. So he declared a national emergency and he used every available resource to try and contain this outbreak. And they, of course, succeeded in that. So it's not necessarily a threat to national security. It just has to be something that's happening now that they really have to deal with, that they can't deal with through already existing means.
Yeah. And the interesting thing about Trump and his infinite stupidity, when he declared his national emergency about this border wall and how it is a national emergency, he even stated that he did not have to do this. He could have got into Congress, but this would be a lot faster. If you have to claim that you do not have to do this,
it's not an emergency.
It's not an emergency.
That's contradictory to the definition of the word.
Yeah, and the thing is that this is not just stupid because of the way he said it. It's stupid because it really puts pressure on both the courts and Congress because he's overreaching his power here. Yeah. That's basically what people are saying. He is, using his executive authority in ways that he's not supposed to. Yeah. So he's breaking the balance of powers.
Also, when we talk about the one of the values that Republicans are pushing is limited control from the government. So it's actually pretty self-contradictory to the Republican values.
Yes, and of course, and it really hurts. A lot of the arguments that they've made against Obama, because they kept talking about how he was overreaching his authority. But now, they're basically claiming that this can go ahead, this is important, this is more important, this is okay. I mean, Mitch McConnell was a huge opponent of Obama. And, there was leaks that said that he was really, really worried about this. And he kept advising the president not to do this. Yeah. Because this would be seen as an, abuse of power. But now that it's happened, he has chosen to support it.
And a lot of states have decided to sue. 16 states have decided to sue this national emergency from Donald Trump. And he even, in his statement about national emergency, he even said that now the states are going to sue me, and we're going to court, and we're going to the Supreme Court. That was also how he spoke when he announced it.
Yeah, in his little sing-song voice.
Yeah, he just has a certain way with words.
Big words.
All the best words.
And the problem here is that, as Mikkel mentioned, it sets a huge pressure on both Congress and the justice system. Because now it's a question of what kind of authority does the president have. And if this goes up to the Supreme Court, it can have some dire consequences on both sides.
Yeah, the thing is that no matter what decision the courts eventually make, it's gonna have a huge impact. Because the thing is that the courts have always had an executive deference. That is that when the president makes these kind of calls, they assume that he has access to intelligence and information that they do not. That he knows how to balance policy with the national interests. So that's always been, this idea that's That's the recipe that he has to decide what can I do, what do I need to do. But of course, if they allow this to go through, they suddenly loosen the concept incredibly. Like suddenly, this this executive deference is huge.
Yeah.
So suddenly, the Democrats can use this for things that they want to do, which is what scares the Republicans.
Yeah, especially if the next election goes in their favor.
Yeah.
Then what's gonna happen?
But it can also go the other way, because if the courts strike this down, and they are not very careful in how they word this, they set precedent in that the courts can very easily overturn the executive branch's decisions.
So if there is an actually national emergency, the court can overrule it and then can have dire consequences for
Future executive, emergency, what?
So no matter which way it goes, it presents a potential problem. And that's just for the courts. For the Republicans, this is a breach of their power. This is the power of the purse lies with the House. So they have, the authority to decide what gets funded. And suddenly, Donald Trump is trying to take this away. Of course, what he has access to shift around is military funding, which means that he can now take funding from some military projects and he can put it into construction of, other projects. But he can only do that on military property, which means that he now has to use his money to buy property along the border to build the wall on. That has to become military property, which is why a large group of Texans actually have sued the government over this, because it's gonna be that the government forces them to sell their land at subpar prices, and then he's going to make that military property.
And it's very notable that it's actually the state of Texas who's actually going against the president just to wrap around the whole dilemma of the Republicans on this issue. And it's not the first time that the president hasn't had backing from the Congress or the House of Representatives, where they had to take on the power that they have left to try to wrap around the situation.
I mean, one thing that's perhaps likely to happen is that we're going to go through this process the same way that we went through the Muslim ban.
Yeah.
Because the Muslim ban was another case where that the executive branch decided something and then it was challenged. And it was struck down in one of the lower courts. Then it proceeded to a high court and it was struck down again. And then it proceeded to the Supreme Court, where it was partially upheld. And we might see the same thing happen here. Yeah. That he's going to, first the Ninth Circuit, I believe, is the first. And then he's going to raise it up until he eventually ends up in the Supreme Court. Yeah. And that's when it gets really exciting. Because, of course, the last two picks for the Supreme Court have been Republicans. One of them stolen right out of Obama's hands. and it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with this. Because at one point, this is aligned with the Republican base. So they are expecting this to go one way. They are expecting these Republican justices to go this way. On the other hand, a lot of these justices are, they're constitutionalists. They really believe in, the Constitution. And if this breaches the Constitution, then how can they uphold this? Yeah. So it's going to be very exciting to see what happens there, because it's going to have huge consequences.
That's another breach of a judiciary branch. If they on purpose know that it isn't constitutional but still upholds it, then what does that mean for the future?
Exactly. I mean, this is really a president who is not afraid to challenge the Constitution.
No. And we have had a lot of presidents who actually challenged the checks and balances of the system, but Trump is very different in the way he does it, because as Bob always mentioned it, the stupidity is...
It can change every minute.
Yeah.
I mean, he can say one thing to a press briefing, and then 5 minutes later he can make a tweet saying the complete opposite. And as you also said, with the national emergency, it's a contradiction to say that this is a national emergency. I don't have to do this when it's not a national emergency.
Yeah. Of course, the power of the national emergency was brought in by the National Emergency Act in the 70s. So it's going to be very interesting to see if they're going to actually try and change this. I mean, because right now a national emergency is very, very loosely defined. So it's going to be very interesting to see if either political party is going to try and go in and more narrowly define what is a national emergency and what can the president truly do.
And maybe that's the problem, because I think really the national emergency it has really been stretched in this situation. I think we can all agree on that because it wasn't really an emergency. So maybe that's the way you have to move forward.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really changed in the last 20 years is that we've gone from a system where there's been a lot of informal traditions. You know, there's been a lot of things that you're just, you know, that you're supposed to do it in a certain way. You know, you're supposed to respect certain boundaries, even though they aren't written in law. Yeah. Even though it's not something, you know, you actually have, you know, you're told. But it's just been something that politicians have always respected because they, you know, that's the best way for the system to function.
It's a code.
Exactly. Yeah. And this has changed. Trump doesn't believe in those kinds of things. He's not, you know, he's not concerned with these things. He just does what he wants.
I mean, you can really say he has a pragmatic attitude towards this. It's like the goals justifies the means. That's probably the attitude he goes with.
But the thing is, I'm not even sure. I don't even know that Trump has any goals. Because yes, he wants to build a border wall, but he doesn't know how he wants to build it. He doesn't, I mean, first he talked about a beautiful concrete wall. And then it became steel fences. And so he's just going along the way. And there's also been a lot of leaks out of it.
Maybe he saw Prison Break and then decided that the walls shouldn't look different.
Did it work in Prison Break?
No, it didn't.
It is in the title.
I mean, I think it depends on what show he has watched. The walls.
Well, but it do say he's watching what is like 6 hours of TV every day.
Yeah, he has what was it? The last schedule that came out where he had like 7 or 8 hours of executive times a day, which is executive time is just, you know, code for the president doing whatever he wants.
It's free time.
Yeah. And most of that is not spent in his office. It's spent, you know, in his private quarters watching TV.
And we also, all his advisors have there's so many leads that have said that Donald Trump doesn't like to read. So they give him 1 to 2 pages of intel that he has to read. So there is like is it daily or weekly national security?
Daily briefings.
Yeah, daily briefings. It has to be 1 to 2 pages long or he does not want to read it.
Man, he should study then.
Yeah, but I also think that it's, you know, it's important to note that even though he gets these briefs in such a short way, he still doesn't care what it says because he just invents his own things. Because we've seen it time and time again where, you know, his own intelligence people have come out and says, no, this is how it is. And then he said, well, they have the wrong facts. And then he's asked, where do you get your facts from? He says, oh, a lot of places.
But that's his standard response.
Exactly.
I mean, he always says, I talk with a lot of generals and a lot of Texans. They want this wall to be built. They say, please, Mr. Trump, build the wall.
Even though the state has sued him.
He also talked about the government shutdown. That a lot of federal workers who work where they either got temporarily fired or they didn't get to work for any payment. He also came out and said that these government federal workers, they said, this is more important. We don't like to get paid. Get the wall built, Mr. Trump. And everybody knows it's a lie. I mean, nobody wants to go to work for free or get fired.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, when they were furloughed, when they were told, you know, you don't come to work today, a lot of them, you know, of course, were very unhappy because, you know, they ended up losing 2 paychecks. Yeah. But also, even those who were supposed to come in, those who were considered essential employees, there was lots of stories about them calling in sick and not showing up. I mean, especially, you know, those who were supposed to check, you know, at airports and stuff. The airport personnel, they didn't show up. They just called in sick massively. And so they were down to 1/3 of the actual workforce, even though they were supposed to show up.
And a lot of people called in sick because they had to look for other work. Some people started becoming Uber drivers because they cannot just go in to work for free. They need to pay their next pay, or they need a paycheck to pay their next bill. So some people had to do it.
Yeah, people don't have infinite amount of money, you know, just to take a break in a month.
I mean, not
a month is a lot.
Not all people got a small loan of $1 million.
Yeah, so this has been a long and fascinating process, but it's also been very scary to watch. I mean, the way that he just throws norms out the window, and I think people by now have lost they've lost the concept of how abnormal he is. Because we've gotten used to all the crazy stuff he does.
Yeah.
But he's not a normal president. He does not conform to any rules. And that's really scary.
That's the most dangerous thing about him.
Yeah.
But I also think if there has to be some sort of glimpse of hope in the future, is that, well, next time, don't ever put a reality star in the president's seat. I mean, but we all knew this going on. When we knew that he was elected, we knew that there would be some major discussions about the competence of the president, and somehow he has surprised us all times after time.
But but the problem about that is, as Mikkel has also mentioned, the Republicans politician who actually knows how government works is in a tough situation. Because if we go against Trump, they go against that base and they can be voted out for the next election.
Yeah.
So the question is, how important is the next election for them compared to the check and balances in the system of government?
Yeah, I mean it's I don't even know how to put it into words how abnormal this is.
Yeah, because it's really unusual situations we haven't experienced before, especially in my lifetime. There hasn't been this much of a conflict based on just simple things as checks and balances, how the boundaries have been crossed in this way.
I don't know if I'll go that far. I mean, throughout U.S. history...
Well,
there
I
has
mean,
been-
in my lifetime.
But even there, I mean, there is a lot of problems when it comes to check and balances, and the president executive power have increased a lot over time.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to things like war. I mean, the Iraq War is a perfect example. I mean, it was an unjustifiable war that was never actually official because it's only Congress
Yeah.
who can declare war in America. So America only declared war 5 times in their lifetime, even though they have been in war throughout the entire of my lifetime.
Yeah, I mean, after the Vietnam War, has really been difficult to actually make an official war after the Vietnam War.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's also a problem with checks and balances, that the president can declare war through these executive powers. And it has nothing to do with... It is not an official war, therefore we are not in war. It's an absurd power the president has. And I also think there's a discussion that Congress and Americans need to have in the future when Trump's gone. Because George W. Bush was also incompetent. He at least knew the codes and how government works. There's some boundaries you don't cross. The thing about Trump is that he's also incompetent, but he does not serve this government code.
Yeah,
and that's extremely dangerous.
And also he definitely shows quality of just pure pettiness at times, where he doesn't want to listen to the guidance of his cabinet.
And it's very interesting that it's very much the Republicans who have been at the forefront of advancing executive power.
Yeah.
Because they are the party of small government, but they really pushed the power of the presidency again and again and again, and it's really been Republican presidents who really advanced what they can do and who's set precedents that where once they've been set, they've been used by others, and it's just continued to be pushed again and again.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the government shutdown and this entire border wall conflict, Trump has even said that he might shut down the government again over this border wall. It has huge impact both on the lives of Americans, and it also has negative impact on the economy because there's a lot of things that you cannot get these services if the government is shut down. And one of the things he told about, he said to was Chuck Schumer, when the first government shut down in Trump's embassy, he said that he will take the blame and full responsibility for this government shutdown. That's also extremely bad politics, but when you actually admitting it's my fault the government is shutting down.
Yeah, and it's pretty gutsy when you talk about that he's getting more and more unpopular.
Yeah.
The more this emergency goes on, and he's just willing to do it again.
Which is ironic, because the whole point of it is, of course, for him to achieve his goals so that he can run his next campaign on it. That he can say, look what I succeeded in, and we're going to continue with these successes. And so he's really done a lot of things where he's, made a mess of things just so he can say that he's got things done. I mean, it's the same thing when he, threw NAFTA out the window just to create a new deal that was almost exactly the same. That's just because he wanted to, he could say, we've done something new and it's much better. I've made the deal much better.
Yeah, I mean, I said I have to do the things I said I would. I firmly believe that is the goal with this.
And when it's coming about this national emergency, he tried to get the funding to Congress because it's Congress who's allocating how government funding is supposed to be. So Trump cannot just make a national emergency and then he gets automatic funding. That means he has to take the funding from somewhere else, normally the military, because that's the biggest budget in America by far.
By far.
And if we know America, they love the military.
They do.
So he has to take the money somewhere. So he's probably going to take it from the military, maybe some other places, and that's also going to make him extremely unpopular.
From what I read, the main two places he can get the money from is one, the military, but two, disaster relief, which is what's so grim about this, that a lot of the money that he's looking...
explain?
Disaster relief is, money that, goes to when they have a natural disaster or something like that. And the money that he's going to be taking might come out of the money that was going to be used to rebuild Puerto Rico after they were massively hit by a hurricane.
Yeah, but remember, he threw beautiful paper towels to Puerto Ricans,
yes.
so they are happy. They are happy.
Yes. They gave it 10
And
out of 10.
it wasn't nearly as catastrophic. It wasn't nearly as a big catastrophe as the one in New Orleans.
No, they got paper towels.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're fine.
He really said that, like, compared to New Orleans, it isn't that much of a big deal.
which is
It's like a pretty incredibly stupid thing to say.
Which is, I mean, it's crazy when you think about it, because they recently did a new statistic about how many people had died as the result of this, and it was in the hundreds. I believe it was almost 1,000 people who had died as a consequence of this hurricane, and most of it had not been because during the actual hurricane, it had been people who had been dependent on medicine who couldn't get it on time, or people who didn't have enough clean water, or that people who were connected to machines that suddenly lost power.
It's just basic living situations there.
All of these things, and so and he's just when he's really just been congratulating himself and patting himself on the shoulder and going, "We did a great job," and now he's going to take the money that was going to be used to rebuild this place that's going to help prevent such a thing happening again, and he's going to use it for an empty political gesture.
And it's really been unpopular since 2005 to actually meddle with those kind of things, because everyone knew how much backlash George W. Bush got after the whole event of the New Orleans hurricane.
Yeah, Katrina, right?
Yeah, Katrina.
Yeah.
Because it was just that was one of the major criticism of his presidency, that they could never get the way they handled that whole situation, and now you're gonna take money from it.
In the immortal words of Kanye West, George Bush doesn't care about black people.
Well, do you remember the whole segment where he says George Bush doesn't like black people, and the host just looks at him in disbelief.
I don't remember who was what, but the comedian, just look at him.
It's Mike Myers. Yeah.
So awkward. But even though that kind of he was a Trumpster for like a couple of months ago, you remember when he was supporting Trump?
Yeah, but he was off his medicine at that point, I think.
Yeah,
he was.
But he recently declared that he would withdraw from politics because he felt taken advantage of.
Oh, you did? It was just hilarious. The reason for why he wanted to leave politics was because one of the people from the Republican Party wanted to print T-shirts called Blaxit or Blexit or something.
It was a woman named Candace Owens, who is a black Republican. I mean, don't look her up. She has no idea what she's talking about.
Yeah,
she does not believe in climate change because Republicans does not believe in climate change.
Yeah,
that's basically her argument.
She wanted to print some Jesus shirts with Blexit, like he's exiting from the black people, and that made him furiously angry.
Yeah, but I think the most interesting thing that came out of the whole Kanye thing was that his wife, Kim Kardashian, who said that the reason he loved Trump was not because of policy or anything, but it was because it proved that someone who was a celebrity could become the president.
And he wanted to be president.
Kanye wanted to be president.
Yeah.
So, that's an interesting
but
thought.
He really received backlash ever since he stepped into the White House, from all kind of people, especially black celebrities who just didn't want to affiliate with him anymore.
But he has said a lot of controversial statements in the past. He also said that slavery was a choice. He believes slavery was a choice because 200 years of slavery and no slaves rebelled, and it's like,
that's pretty.
Read history.
That's pretty self-contradictory to one of his songs, "New Slaves," where he basically talks about how black people are slaves in modern society. But we're gonna. This is not the last time we're gonna talk about Trump.
Actually, probably in the near future, the Russian investigation of Donald Trump.
Special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation
is coming up very soon, and when we're going to try to get Jan Bondale in, who is an expert and have followed this very closely. And I'm looking forward to see what's going to happen in this investigation. It's going to be extremely interesting if maybe Donald Trump, maybe his presidency is over soon, maybe it's nothing. We will find out pretty soon, I believe.
I think it's going to be very interesting to watch, but I also think that we shouldn't get our hopes up too high.
I agree.
Because I mean, this still has to go through the Republican Attorney General to he has to make a summary of it that he delivers to Congress, and this is only the investigation by Mueller that's complete. He has actually given over a lot of material to other investigations who are now investigating his inauguration, his personal attorney. So this is just one investigation closing, even though it's the major one. Yeah. So it's going to be interesting to see if this has any consequences at all.
So this is far from over with Trump, and we are looking forward to have Jan Bondale on the podcast.
Yeah, and we are actually just happy to be back with a new season of Three Fort Podcast.
Yeah, so we see you next week.